Hi, this is Mrs. Robertson, and I'm going to do another quick review over Chapter 5, the chapter that you're having your test over tomorrow. So in Chapter 5, Lesson 1, it reviewed algebraic expressions starting on page 349. Here we have the vocabulary of what a variable is, an algebraic expression. It does not contain an equal sign. Expressions don't have equal signs. Coefficient is the number in front of a variable, and how to define a variable. That's what we discussed for Chapter 5, Lesson 1. On page 350, it gives you examples of coefficients, terms, like terms. So if you need more practice on those types of things, you'll want to go to Chapter 1. Page 349 all the way to page 355. It talks about different ways to replace a variable. Just be careful with your negative signs. These are not hard, but with negative signs and squaring a number, you have to be very careful. Then, our next lesson in Chapter 5 deals with sequences. I think you were all pretty good. These were simple sequences. They were not complex. I felt like the sequence lesson was a very easy lesson to do. And that Chapter 5, Lesson 2 is page 357 all the way to page 363. Then our next lesson, properties of operation. For some of you that might not remember your properties, go to Lesson 3, and it'll give you examples of the commutative, associative property for both addition and multiplication, additive identity property, the multiplicative identity property, and the multiplicative property of 0. There are examples on page 368 of the properties. There we have the examples of the commutative, the associative, the additive identity, the multiplicative identity, and multiplicative property of 0. Please make sure you know the difference between each property. The next lesson that you will go to will be Lesson 4. This is the distributive property lesson. And the distributive property talks about distributing the term that's on the outside to all the terms that are in the inside of a parenthesis. Here you have 4 times 6 plus 2 equals 4 times 6 plus 4 times 2. It is true if there's a subtraction sign inside the parentheses also. 3 times 7 minus 3 times 5. And that was the distributive property. Once again, be very careful. Look at all the examples to make sure you're familiar with how to do each type of problem. Then the next, and that lesson goes all the way to page 381. Your next lesson, simplifying algebraic expressions. And this is the one where you combine your terms. You have to identify your coefficients and your constants. On page 388, it gives a nice visual of constants, like terms, the coefficients. That is all on page 388. Then, at the bottom of page 388, it gives examples of how to get rid of your subtraction signs. So please make sure you watch the instructional video on this to make sure you know how to do each one of these, each type of problem. Remember to always remove your subtraction signs when doing these problems. All right, then you go on to page 390. Again, it's just more practice of dealing with identifying your like terms, your coefficients, your constants, and simplifying. Then we go on to the next page where you are adding linear expressions, or how to add linear expressions. That's on page 395. This is Lesson 6, Chapter 5, Lesson 6. And this is where you learn how to be careful with the subtraction problems on here. Be very careful. I think that's in our next lesson here, but it shows how to combine your like terms, get rid of your subtraction signs. Make sure you look at these examples. Once again, they are done for you in one of the earlier instructional video problems or video pages. Then we go on to how to subtract linear expressions, lesson 7. So in lesson 7, this is where we do, on page 404, I'll do this example for you again. You need to get rid of your subtraction signs. Add the opposite, and yes, add the opposite, making that a -1. So what you will have here, -1 times 2x, -1 times -7. Be very careful when you do these. You will have 5x plus -9 plus -2x plus a +7. -1 times 2x is -2x, -1 times -7 is +7. Then you will combine your like terms, 5x and -2x, 3x, -9 and 7 is -2, or 3x minus 2. If you need to practice these problems, you'll want to go to page 404 to 407 to practice on these types of problems. There are more problems to practice on page 409. If you need to do extra practice, page 409 would be another nice spot for you to go to. Some of the answers are in the back of your math book for this page, so you could always go and look for those answers to see if you did them correctly in the back of the book. Then factoring was our last lesson, how to factor linear expressions. That is the one, you just set it up like I talked about earlier, and you're trying to find the common factor. Most often they want you to look for the greatest common factor. So do your factor trees. And go back and look at your book. If you've taken good notes throughout this time, you should have some very helpful items for you to reflect on before you take the test tomorrow. And that is it. Have a good day, and once again, I will see you tomorrow.